It was meant to be the war-winning weapon, the answer to the terrifying German Tiger and Panther tanks that dominated the battlefields of Europe. It rolled off the production lines as the pinnacle of American engineering, the M4A3E2 Jumbo Sherman. With thicker armor than any Allied tank before it, a powerful 75mm gun, and the reliable heart of the legendary Sherman, it was designed to be a fortress on tracks, a breakthrough tank that could absorb punishment and dish it out. But from its very first moments in combat, a terrible truth became clear. This advanced marvel was a death trap. Its very strengths became its fatal weaknesses. It was too slow, too heavy, and tragically, its most celebrated feature, its imposing armor, was a cruel illusion that lured crews into a false sense of security. This is the story of how the Allied push for a technological quick fix created one of the most disappointing tanks of the war. The problem was the shocking brutality of the tank war in the hedgerows of Normandy and the forests of the Ardennes. Standard M4 Shermans were being torn apart by German 88mm guns at ranges where their own shells simply bounced off the enemy's thick, sloped armor. American tank crews were dying in droves, their vehicles earning grim nicknames like Ronson and Tommy Cooker. The pressure from frontline commanders was immense. We need a tank that can take a hit. The U.S. Army needed a solution, and they needed it fast. The stakes were the lives of thousands of tankers and the success of the entire Western Front offensive. Something had to be done to counter the German big cats. The official solution was the Jumbo. But in their rush to get a heavily armored tank to the front, the engineers made a series of catastrophic compromises. They took a standard Sherman hull and welded on enormous slabs of extra steel, turning a nimble medium tank into a slow, cumbersome behemoth. They gave it a more powerful engine, but it wasn't enough. The Jumbo was a patch, not a new design. And this patch created a new, even deadlier problem. It looked invincible. It felt invincible. But on the battlefields of 1944, no tank was invincible. The Jumbo's appearance was a lie, and its crews were about to pay the price for that deception. The stage was set for a disastrous debut, where advanced engineering would meet the brutal reality of modern warfare. The man who would become the reluctant hero of this flawed steel giant was Sergeant Miles "Mike" Donahue, a veteran tank commander from the 4th Armored Division. Donahue was no stranger to the Sherman's vulnerabilities. He had already bailed out of 2 burning tanks in Normandy. He was a practical, battle-hardened leader who trusted his instincts and his crew above all else. When his unit was among the first to receive the new Jumbos in late 1944, he and his men were initially awestruck. Here, finally, was a Sherman that looked like it could fight back. The armor was so thick on the front that machine gun fire simply pinged off it like rain. It felt like a real fortress. Donahue, a mechanic in civilian life, appreciated the raw, brute force solution it represented. He saw it as a sledgehammer in a war that had been fought with knives. The advanced idea behind the Jumbo was, in theory, a simple one: up-armor a proven chassis. But the execution was a nightmare of compromises. To create the Jumbo, engineers had to add over 5 tons of extra steel plate to the Sherman's hull and turret. The front glacis was a monstrous slab of armor, and the turret was encased in a thick, cast bullet that made it look incredibly formidable. But this came at a devastating cost. The tank's suspension, designed for a 30-ton vehicle, was now groaning under 42 tons. The transmission was strained to its limits. The upgraded engine was insufficient, making the Jumbo painfully slow, with a top speed of just 22 miles per hour on a good road. It consumed fuel at an alarming rate, and its maneuverability was crippled. It was no longer a medium tank. It was an underpowered, heavy tank built on a medium tank's frame. The conflict emerged not from the enemy, but from the battlefield itself. The Jumbo was designed for breakthrough assaults, but it was too slow to keep pace with the more nimble standard Shermans and infantry it was meant to support. It became a magnet for every German anti-tank gun on the battlefield. While its thick frontal armor could indeed withstand hits from standard 75mm guns, its sides and rear were just as vulnerable as any other Shermans. And the Germans quickly learned its weakness. The Jumbo's immense weight and poor power-to-weight ratio meant it struggled in the muddy, broken terrain of the European winter. It would bog down, becoming a stationary, irresistible target. The greatest opposition, however, was the false confidence it bred. Crews and standard Shermans knew their vulnerability and used speed and agility to survive. Jumbo crews, feeling invulnerable from the front, were often lured into tactical traps, only to be destroyed by a flank shot from a well-hidden Panther or a deadly 88mm shell fired from a range where even their invincible armor was useless. The Jumbo wasn't just a tank, it was a psychological trap, and its crews were walking right into it. Sergeant Donahue's defiance was not against a direct order, but against the creeping complacency he saw in his own crew and other Jumbo units. He saw them beginning to rely on the armor, to drive straight up roads as if they were invincible. He made a private pact with his crew. They would operate their Jumbo, audacious, with the same desperate caution they'd used in their thin-skinned Shermans. They would use every scrap of cover, never presenting their flank, and always assume the next shot would be the one that killed them. This mindset put them at odds with other Jumbo commanders who mocked their caution. But Donahue knew the truth. The armor was a blessing and a curse, and overconfidence was the deadliest enemy of all. This is where we get into the nerd stuff, the brutal engineering reality of the Jumbo's failure. The tank's greatest weakness wasn't its speed, but its transmission and final drives. These components were not designed to handle the constant, immense stress of the Jumbo's extra weight. During sharp turns, especially in soft ground, the strain was catastrophic. The crew of the Audacious learned this firsthand during a routine advance near the Siegfried Line. As Donahue ordered a hard turn to avoid a suspected anti-tank gun position, the left final drive, a crucial component transferring power to the tracks, sheared completely with a sound like a gunshot. The 42-ton beast lurched and ground to a halt, one track dead. They were immobilized, sitting ducks in the middle of an open field. The armor that was supposed to save them had now trapped them. The first catastrophic failure was not a glorious death in a duel with a tiger, but an ignominious disablement. As Donahue's crew frantically tried to assess the damage, German mortar fire began to walk toward their position. They were completely vulnerable. A nearby Sherman tried to tow them, but the Jumbo's dead weight was too much. Eventually, under covering smoke, the crew was forced to abandon Audacious. They had to destroy their own tank with a thermite grenade to prevent its capture. A humiliating end for the invincible Jumbo. It wasn't enemy fire that had killed it. It was its own flawed, overstressed mechanics. This mechanical failure was a quiet epidemic, crippling more Jumbos from within than enemy guns were destroying from without. The dream of a breakthrough tank was broken, not by German steel, but by American over-engineering. The Jumbo was proving to be its own worst enemy.
The aha moment for Sergeant Donahue and his crew came in the shattered ruins of a village east of Bastogne. They were in a new Jumbo, Audacious Edge. Their previous lesson burned into their minds. The transmission was a ticking time bomb, the weight a constant enemy. But they realized the Jumbo's true, brutal purpose wasn't to be a nimble hunter. It was to be an immovable object, a steel pillbox that could advance. The key was to leverage its one undeniable strength, its frontal armor, by always controlling the angle of the fight. They would become the anvil, letting other, faster units be the hammer. They would pick a killing ground and let the enemy break against them. The real test came during a German counterattack aimed at cutting off a key supply route. Donahue's platoon, with his Jumbo as its centerpiece, was ordered to hold a crossroads. He didn't advance. Instead, he nestled audacious AJ into a rubble-strewn choke point, using the destroyed buildings to protect its vulnerable flanks and rear. He created a fatal funnel. When the German armor appeared, a mix of Panzer IVs and a single hulking Panther, they had to come straight at him. The Jumbo's role was no longer to chase, it was to endure. The Panther fired first. The 75mm shells slammed into the Jumbo's thick glacis plate with a deafening clang, rocking the tank on its suspension, but failing to penetrate. Inside, the crew was showered with sparks and paint chips, but they were alive. Donahue held his fire, waiting. The Panther, confident in its own superior gun, advanced for a killing shot. The payoff was a symphony of controlled, brutal violence. At point-blank range, Donahue fired his 75mm gun. The shell struck the Panther's lower glacis, a weak point. It didn't destroy it, but it shocked the German crew and disabled its transmission. The Panther was now as immobilized as Donahue's first Jumbo had been. The following Panzer IVs, now confused and without their leader, were picked off by the supporting Shermans and bazooka teams Donahue had positioned on the flanks. The Jumbo had done its job. It had absorbed the enemy's best shot, stopped the spearhead dead in its tracks, and created chaos for others to exploit. The crossroads held. In that moment, the disaster became a legend, not because it was a good tank, but because a determined crew had learned how to use its one monstrous advantage to win.
The immediate impact of the Jumbo's service was a story of stark contradictions. In isolated, defensive actions like the one Sergeant Donahue mastered, it could be a formidable, battle-winning obstacle. But as a breakthrough tank, its intended role, it was a profound failure. Its short operational lifespan tells the entire story. The Jumbo was introduced in late 1944 and was essentially obsolete by the spring of 1945. It was too slow to exploit breakthroughs, and its mechanical vulnerabilities made it a liability for long-range advances. While it inspired momentary confidence, it could not change the fundamental imbalance of power on the armored battlefield. The true solution, the M26 Pershing heavy tank, arrived too late and in too few numbers to make a decisive difference. The Jumbo was a stopgap, and a flawed one at that.
The statistics cement its legacy as a disappointment. Only about 254 M4A3E2 Jumbos were ever produced. Compared to the tens of thousands of standard Shermans, this was a tiny, specialized force. While its frontal armor was impressive, its overall combat effectiveness was hamstrung by its mobility wickles and its inability to destroy the heaviest German tanks beyond point-blank range. It was a resource-intensive solution that ultimately provided a marginal return. For every Jumbo that heroically held a crossroads, another was abandoned with a broken transmission or destroyed by a flanking shot it was too slow to evade. The legacy of the Jumbo Sherman is a cautionary tale about the perils of hasty technological escalation. It was a product of desperation, a quick fix that ignored the holistic nature of tank design, where mobility, firepower, and protection must be in balance. In its attempt to add protection, it sacrificed the very mobility that gave the Sherman its strategic value. The Jumbo's failure directly informed post-war American tank doctrine.
leading to the development of well-rounded main battle tanks like the Patton series. It stands as a relic of a time when the Allies, facing a qualitative shock, scrambled for an answer and built a tank that was advanced in the worst way possible. It was a brilliant effort that resulted in a flawed machine, a testament to how the most well-intentioned engineering can become a tragic and costly war relic.